Hi everybody, welcome back to BioBuzz. This is episode 3/4. I'm trying something new out, and instead of doing episodes per class, we're going to be doing episodes per week. So let me know what you guys prefer, if you like the longer, more in-depth videos, or if you prefer us to go back to the shorter, a little less in-depth, but still approachable videos. So if you prefer the old way, leave us a comment on Instagram or YouTube, and whatever way you guys prefer, we'll go back to. I have to apologize, this episode is coming out super late. I should have had this video out to you guys by Friday, which was my goal, but unfortunately, that did not happen. I tried to record this video so many times, but as you've probably picked up by now, I do not have a co-host, sadly, so it's just me, and I found it very difficult to sit and talk to my microphone by myself, but bear with me. I do have a dream, and that dream is to get this video out today. So, the next episode will be out on Friday and it'll cover this week, which is week 3. But this episode is going to be covering classes 3 and 4. So, let's get into it. We're going to start off with two of biology's favorite things, which are water and carbon. So, go ahead and grab your water bottles because we're starting with water. So, H2O, two hydrogens, one oxygen. Oxygen is more electronegative than hydrogen. Based off our electronegativity scale, the ones we see mainly and the ones you need to memorize are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen in that order from least to most. If you're still iffy on the whole topic of electronegativity, go back and review our last episode. We are more comprehensive then. I'm sorry. I'm choosing my words very carefully here because I'm not on script today. So hopefully this comes off a little bit more authentic, but I am struggling. So back to what we're talking about, hydrogen and oxygen. So in water, hydrogen is left with a partial positive charge since oxygen, which is more electronegative, often hogs those electrons. So oxygen has a partial negative, hydrogen partial positive. And it's because of this polarity that makes water so good at forming hydrogen bonds. There are two requirements that need to be fulfilled for hydrogen bonds to happen. One, hydrogen needs to be left with a partial positive charge, so we are never going to see a hydrogen bond form when there's just a hydrogen atom out there because it has no charge because it's not sharing or losing electrons. So hydrogen needs to have a partial positive charge, oopsie, and it needs to be in proximity to an atom with a partial positive, no, partial negative. Oh my God, I'm stuttering. I'm sorry. Okay. So, water, a lot of H2O molecules floating around with a lot of hydrogens with partial positive charges and carbons with partial negative. Therefore, the fulfillments are cleared and a nearby hydrogen bonds with a nearby carbon. This answers the age-old question, is water sticky? Yes, it is. Okay. And because of this amazing property, water is great at dissolving things and breaking apart ionic compounds like salts and mixing them into solutions. And that's why it is called the universal solvent. It's really important to life because it allows water to dissolve nutrients, regulate your body temperature, and hydrating you. So shout out to the water. It's the GOAT. Next, let's talk about carbon, the backbone of life. It's important because it is incredibly versatile. Carbon has 4 valence electrons, so it can form up to 4 hydrogen bonds with other atoms. Other atoms. Think of carbon as that one friend who's good at everything and can hang out with anybody and everybody loves them. Carbon typically bonds with hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and even other carbon atoms. It can make structures like chains, rings, and branches. And because of this, we get to see so much diversity in life. Without carbon, life as we know it wouldn't exist. Carbon's versatility lets it create everything from DNA to proteins to carbohydrates. It's like a master Lego brick that fits into every piece, and you pretty much need it for every single build. Next, let's get into why some molecules love water and others avoid it like the plague. So, you've got two types of molecules, hydrophobic and hydrophilic. Hydrophobic molecules like oil are nonpolar and repel water. A good trick to remember this is hydrophobic is like, nah, nah, I don't want the water, nuh-uh. And nonpolar means non-water loving. At least that's how I remembered it. And that's why oil and water don't mix. Okay, next let's talk about what makes a molecule hydrophilic. Think about the L in philic for love. They love water. So, if hydrophobic are nonpolar, that means that hydrophilic are polar. So let's examine two type of molecules. Let's go with an easy one. Let's talk about H2O first, which is water. We already established that oxygen takes those electrons and hogs them, making it so the electrons are not being shared equally, meaning that this is polar. And because it's polar, water is hydrophilic, which I would hope so, because it is water. But let's think about a different one. Let's go with CH4 with this, which is methane. So it's one carbon attached to four hydrogens. So because both carbon and hydrogen have very low electronegativity, they're going to share electrons pretty equally, meaning that they're nonpolar and they're sharing equally, making them non-water loving, also known as hydrophobic. So that's how you can determine if a molecule is hydrophobic or hydrophilic. You're going to want to examine what kind of atoms are in there. Are there a lot of oxygens? Are there a lot of nitrogens? How big is the structure? If it's relatively big, then it can get by having maybe one oxygen or two nitrogens and a lot of carbons and a lot of hydrogens. However, if the molecule is smaller, then that one oxygen is really going to hog it from all of them. So you kind of have to gauge, is it equal? Is it not equal? It can be a little bit hard, but with practice, you'll have it down in no time. So the last thing I want to talk about from class 3 was functional groups. Functional groups could be an episode on their own. There are many of them, and there's a lot to remember. The ones that I recommend having down the most are probably hydroxyl, methyl, carbonyl, carboxyl, amino, phosphate, and sulfide. Those groups we see a lot in Build 1, but again, you are urged to remember them all. So you definitely will see some other ones in there that I didn't mention, but try and remember as many as you can. I know it's hard, but it'll definitely help you in the long run. So think of functional groups as accessories that they give molecules their own unique personal traits. For example, testosterone and estradiol both have the same carbon skeleton, meaning they have the same carbon structure, but they behave totally different because of their functional groups. It's these tiny differences that change how a molecule interacts with another molecule. For my car lovers out there, you can think of this as like putting a spoiler on a car. It doesn't change the car itself, but it does change how it performs. Quickly, before we go into the segments of class 4, I did want to go over a couple questions that I heard. I was able to go to your guys' office hours last week, and I got to hear from you guys personally and what type of questions you guys had. And one of the most important questions that I felt like I should address in today's episode is, how do you know how many valence electrons an element can have? So you're going to want to take out a periodic table over this so you can reference what I'm talking about. And I'm going to start off easy for you guys, okay? So you're going to want to separate everything into rows. For the example, hydrogen's the first row, oxygen would be on the second row, and aluminum would be on the third row. The first row wants to have 2 electrons. The second row wants to have 8 electrons, and the third row wants to have 18 electrons. There's a formula to remember this. It's 2n squared. So if it's on the first row, that's 1. If it's on the second row, that's 2. And if it's on the third row, that's 3. So let's take an easy one. Let's go carbon. That's on the second row. So that's 2 to the power of 2 is 4 times 2 is 8. And that's how we know that carbon wants to have 8 electrons. Let's do it again. So hydrogen is on the first row. So that's 1 squared. That's 1 times 2 is 2. It wants to have 2 electrons. Now we're going to have to do, how many electrons does each atom already come with? We'll start off super easy again. We'll go with hydrogen. Hydrogen is first in its row, which means it has one valence electron. So because it wants two and it has one, we need one electron, meaning we can have one bond. Let's go with carbon. Carbon is fourth on its row, so it has four valence electrons. Remember how it wants eight electrons? 8 minus 4 is 4, which means it can form up to 4 bonds. We'll go with oxygen. Oxygen is sixth in its row. It needs 8 electrons, so 8 minus 6 is 2, meaning it can form 2 bonds. I think you guys are starting to catch on, but let's do one more for practice. We'll go with nitrogen. Nitrogen is fifth on its row. It wants 8 electrons, so 8 minus 5 is 3, so it can form 3 bonds. And that's the quickest way to figure out how many bonds an atom can form. Next, let's get into class 4, which is going to be covering DNA, RNA, and proteins, the blueprint, the messenger, and the builder. Let's start off with DNA. It's a fancy name. Deoxy. Forgive me, I'm going to butcher the name. Deoxyribonucleic nucleic acid. I probably said that wrong. Someone out there is cringing right now. But I did not have to say the name out loud when I was taking Build One myself, so this is all new to me too. It's a fancy name, but it's basically the instructional manual for life. Picture this, if your body is a house, DNA is the blueprint. It tells you where to put the walls, the windows, and the roof. DNA is made up of two strands that twist around each other in a double ionic helix shape. You can think of it as a spiral staircase where the rails of the staircase are made up of sugar and phosphate molecules, while the steps are pairs of nitrogenous bases, adenine, thymine, guanine, guanine, and cytosine. Here's a fun fact. You're going to want to make sure you know this. A always pairs with T and G always pairs with C. They're like best friends and they refuse to partner up with anyone else except A. A's a little bit of a cheat. I'll get into that later. But A goes with T, G goes with C, okay? Next up is RNA. So if DNA is the blueprint, RNA is the contractor running back and forth between the blueprints and the builders. It's a single strand, unlike DNA, and it has one big difference. Instead of thymine, it uses uracil, U. This is why I said A was a cheat, because A can pair with U and T. So A with T or U and G with C. Okay? RNA has a ton of roles, but its main job is to take instructions from DNA and help build proteins. This process happens in two steps, transcription and translation. Transcription is when DNA is copied into a strand of messenger, mRNA. You can think of it as like writing down a recipe for a cake. While translation is when the mRNA travels to a ribosome, where the instructions are then used to assemble a protein. It's the actual baking of the cake. What's wild about RNA is it can unfold into many different shapes to perform different tasks. Some RNA regulate DNA, others carry molecules around, and even some act like enzymes. Now let's talk about proteins. If DNA is the blueprint and mRNA is the messenger, then proteins are the builders actually doing the heavy lifting. Proteins are made up of monomers called amino acids, which are like beads on a string. These amino acids link together to form long chains, which are then folded into specific shapes. And here's the kicker. The shape of the protein determines its function. Back to that idea of structure determines function. For example, enzymes are proteins that speed up chemical reactions. Insulin, which regulates blood sugar, is another protein. Even the antibodies in your immune system fight infections are proteins. Something also worth noting when we're talking about proteins is they're only built up of 20 amino acids. 20 might not seem a lot, but there are a lot of different sequences that can be built up of just these 20 amino acids, resulting in so much diversity and different proteins. So now you probably are not wondering, but maybe you are, how do DNA, RNA, and proteins work together? They work together through a process called Central Dogma, which goes from DNA to RNA to protein to trait. I'll say it again because you probably will get quizzed on this eventually. DNA to RNA to protein to trait in that order. Let's say you have a gene in your DNA that codes for eye color. That gene gets transcribed into RNA, which then gets translated into a protein. That protein determines whether your eyes are blue, brown, green, or hazel. It's like a well-oiled assembly line, with each step building on the last. And this process happens in every single cell of your body all day, every day, 24 hours a day. I was gonna do that into seconds, but I don't know it off the top of my head. And that's a wrap for today's episode of BioBuzz. Again, I apologize that this episode is coming out to you guys super late. Next episode will be on time on Friday. Good luck on your guys' midterm if you're listening to this before that. I know it's coming up. We're going to be doing a midterm review for your next midterm. However, we're just starting everything out as well for this quarter, so it's a bit mumble jumble, but hang in there. We promise to get better. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at BioBuzzers and subscribe to our YouTube channel at BioBuzz Tutors for more fun, biology-packed content. Thank you for listening, and remember, science is messy, fascinating, and totally worth exploring. See you next time on BioBuzz.